The greatest illusion we face in modern life is the notion that noise equals crisis. We are surrounded by a constant cacophony, the insistent beep of notifications, the angry blare of traffic horns, the endless chatter that never seems to end. It builds a pressure inside us, an assumption that if the outside world is messy, our inner lives must be unraveling as well. We mistake external overwhelm for internal lack of control. We believe that peace can only exist when the world quiets down completely. But what if true tranquility is not found in silence, but in the cultivation of stillness within the storm? Consider your daily commute. It is a microcosm of modern existence, a river of restless energy pushing against itself, filled with urgent intentions and anxieties about arrival. Each honk, each sudden jolt of the brakes, acts like a tiny emotional trigger, pulling us into a cycle of reactive frustration. We gather up these irritations, the slow walk across the street, the perceived injustice in a line, the relentless glow of a screen, and carry them inside with us, little pebbles of accumulated annoyance weighing down our spirit by the time we reach our desks or homes. This journey begins not with grand pronouncements, but with these small moments of profound friction. In the space between the stimulus and your reaction, there lies an immense, almost unimaginable freedom. This is where philosophy steps in, offering not definitive answers, but a fundamentally different way of seeing reality, a shield for the mind against the torrent of chaos. The ancient wisdom teaches us to draw a sharp line between what we can influence and what we must simply observe. Look at the stream of traffic again. You cannot command it to slow down, nor can you control the aggressive gestures of the driver beside you. They operate within their own internal dramas of urgency and impatience. To become distressed by their actions is, therefore, to willingly sacrifice your peace to a narrative that does not belong to you. It is giving away your emotional sovereignty over external variables. This subtle shift in focus, from caring about the event itself to analyzing your own relationship with the event, is revolutionary. We waste an astonishing amount of energy worrying about things that will never happen, regretting things that cannot be undone, or becoming angered by things that were simply outside our jurisdiction from the start. Seneca recognized this pattern well. We live under the illusion that having a desire is the same as being entitled to it. Life is merely presenting us with data points, and the anxiety comes only when we attempt to treat those data points as unbreakable promises of comfort or predictability. The greatest struggle, therefore, is not against other people or circumstances. It is against our own impulsive judgment, our attachment to outcomes, and our deep-seated human need for absolute certainty. The core practice revealed by the Stoics is simple yet profoundly difficult: mastering assent. We must learn to pause at the moment of irritation. When something happens that causes a sudden spike of anxiety, a spilled cup, an unexpected delay, a comment made in passing, we do not immediately agree with the thought attached to it. We recognize it. We name it. We say this is merely a thought, a judgment, not a fact of life. This pause creates the vital gap we spoke about earlier, the space between the stimulus and the reasoned response. In that millimeter of silence, we have the power to choose rationality over emotional contagion. This discipline demands constant vigilance because our minds are designed for narrative momentum, always rushing toward the next point of tension or resolution. We build entire dramatic narratives around minor inconveniences. The traffic delay becomes evidence of a broken system. The slow cashier reflects personal disregard. These narratives are exhausting, and they are untrue. They are stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world's inherent unpredictability. To find inner calm in chaos, one must become an observer of these stories. One must detach from the story being told by external events and instead focus on anchoring oneself in a steady state of internal awareness. This is not passive resignation. It is active psychological fortification. It requires accepting that life will remain fundamentally unpredictable, full of friction and minor tragedies. The weather will shift without warning. People will disappoint us. Our plans will inevitably collide with the messy reality of other human wills. To expect perfect predictability from a chaotic world is to set ourselves up for perpetual disappointment. Therefore, genuine self-mastery begins with this radical acceptance of contingency. It means embracing the friction. When we learn that discomfort, annoyance, or unexpected delay does not signify a flaw in our character or the failure of our goals, we lose their power over us. The noise outside becomes merely background sound, no longer dictating the rhythm of our hearts. This recognition is the first and most powerful step toward becoming masters not of the world, but of ourselves. We have spent time observing the external noise. The horns blare, the screens flicker, and the endless current of modern expectation pulls us along, urging us always to be faster, to achieve more, to react immediately. We learned that much of this frantic energy is simply a collection of uncontrolled variables. The rush hour gridlock, the unexpected delay, the person cutting you off in line. These things are facts. They happen whether we want them to or not. They are indifferent, but understanding indifference is only half the battle. The true difficulty lies inward. It is not enough merely to observe that traffic noise exists. We must address the internal cacophony. The anxious thoughts, the looping concerns, the relentless should-haves and if-onlys. These inner debates are often far louder and much harder to manage than the physical noise outside our windows. The most profound questions of ethics rarely arrive with a grand revelation. They creep in during moments of mundane friction. It is the slow cashier whose distraction causes a minor delay. It is the coffee spill on your pristine coat. It is the unanswered email that hangs over you like an accusation. These small irritations become perfect laboratories for philosophy. Because when the stakes are low, when nothing truly catastrophic has happened, we have the luxury of time to pause and ask ourselves something fundamental. Should I care? Stoicism forces us into this uncomfortable but vital introspection. We confront the emotional impulse that screams, "This is wrong. This is unfair. Why did this happen to me?" And we must learn to separate two concepts that are often confused: concern and control. Concern implies investment. It suggests that the outcome of an event, like the spilled coffee or the delay, matters significantly to our peace. Control, however, refers only to what truly belongs within the sphere of our personal agency. The spill itself is out of your control. Your emotional reaction to the spill is out of your control until you consciously choose it. But where do we draw the line? This becomes a deeply difficult mental discipline. We are naturally programmed for engagement. We feel an immediate tug towards resolution, toward restoring balance or achieving justice in the micro-drama unfolding before us. We worry about how this small injustice reflects on our personal standing, or how it affects our schedule. These worries, these anxieties of consequence, feel real, substantial, and absolutely urgent. They demand that we allocate mental resources, emotional energy, and physical attention to them. Yet, when we look closely, we see that most of these perceived injustices are merely fleeting events, outside the true jurisdiction of our will. The internal debate centers on accepting this boundary. If a slow cashier ruins your meticulously planned morning routine, the initial thought is, this ruins everything. This linkage between a minor external event and a massive internal collapse is a deeply flawed narrative that we spend our whole lives reinforcing. We assign undue importance to the external because it disrupts our expectations. Our peace becomes conditional, reliant on smooth sailing from others or predictable systems. The practice here is one of radical de-escalation. It begins with recognizing that while you have no control over the cashier's distraction or the coffee stain, you retain absolute sovereign authority over the landscape of your own mind. You can choose to treat it as a catastrophic failure, deserving of anger and frustration, or you can choose to see it merely as a minor input, a piece of data in the vast, complex stream of everyday existence. The choice determines the emotional cost. To practice this is not to become emotionless. That would be a denial of reality. Rather, it is to become critically aware. To observe your feelings like an impartial scientist observing bacteria under glass. You acknowledge the flush of irritation, the sharp jab of injustice, but you do not automatically fuse with them. You step back and state, I notice I am feeling frustrated because of this delay. This simple linguistic act creates necessary psychological distance. It transforms a passive reaction into an active observation. This is where philosophy becomes intensely personal. It is not merely about understanding philosophical tenets. It is about applying that ancient, rigorous logic to the messy, unpredictable reality of Tuesday afternoon. We must train our minds to pause at these moments of irritation, to resist the immediate gravity of complaint or resentment. The delay does not invalidate your worth. The spill does not diminish your capacity for goodness. They are simply things that happened. The core wisdom we draw from this internal audit is realizing that our greatest vulnerability lies in treating externals as if they determined our intrinsic value. When a minor annoyance makes us feel inadequate or derailed, it is usually because deep down, we have attached the security of our inner life to flawless circumstances. The pursuit of perfection, the perfectly predictable schedule, the flawlessly executed plan, the perfectly accommodating other person, is ultimately an unstable and exhausting goal. The goal of minimizing care is not indifference for its own sake. It is the cultivation of focused resilience. It means recognizing that while we must tend to our duties in the world, our professional obligations, our familial roles, the quality of those performances cannot be dependent on perfect external conditions. We accept the imperfect performance of others, and we anchor our self-worth solely within our own efforts and our virtuous response. This ongoing process is nothing less than retraining a deeply ingrained neural pathway. It asks us to repeatedly derail the cycle of expectation failure. When frustration builds, that tight knot in the chest associated with this should not be happening. We redirect the focus inward. We ask, what is within my scope? Is it my attitude, my next conscious choice? If yes, then here lies our true ground of freedom. To master this internal dialogue is to gain a profound and abiding sovereignty over one's own emotional self. It moves us from being reactive passengers in the stream of fate to becoming conscious captains, navigating by the steady light of inner reason. We have spent so much time in a world that demands absolute control. We feel compelled to manage the economy, predict the behavior of others, and chart every single outcome from tomorrow's sunrise. It is exhausting, this endless desire to tighten our grip on reality until our fingers ache. Yet, history, wisdom, and profound human suffering teach us a difficult, liberating truth. Much of what we spend our lives trying to master simply does not belong to us. The grand illusion we inhabit is the myth of control. It suggests that if only we could predict enough variables, if only we owned the stock market's fluctuations, or guaranteed another person's affection or approval, then we would finally achieve peace. We build complex fortresses of expectation around our inner lives, believing that stability depends entirely on external certainty. But life is designed to resist such neat architectural plans. Consider the simplest elements of existence. Gravity pulls regardless of our wishes, weather shifts without consulting our calendars, and the human heart rebels against perfect prediction. To acknowledge this randomness is not a defeat. It is the first step toward true freedom. It means locating the points where resistance causes us pain and understanding that those points are almost always external. Our struggle to control the outside world becomes a profound distraction from the single domain we actually govern, our own mind. We waste immense emotional energy attempting to steer the course of rivers or calm the unpredictable winds of public opinion. And every time we fixate on the unchangeable, we strip away our capacity for simple joy and acceptance. Think about your deepest anxieties. Are they really rooted in a tangible threat, a predator approaching, a physical lack, or are they narratives constructed by an overactive imagination? The narrative of professional failure, the fear of abandonment, the dread of judgment. The latter is where the grip fails. These fears are chains we forge in our own thoughts. The wise realization is that true power lies not in prevention, but in resilience. It is finding a sturdy anchor within oneself when the storms, the financial crashes, the political turmoil, the sudden personal betrayals, rage outside. Resilience is not the ability to stop events from happening. It is the capacity to remain upright when they do. We must therefore learn to distinguish between the sphere of influence and the sphere of concern. The sphere of influence includes your judgment, your intentional effort, your present reaction. These are yours alone. The sphere of concern encompasses everything else, other people's thoughts about you, random global events, or even the perfect performance of others. When we understand this boundary, the weight lifts instantly. We stop treating every uncontrollable factor as a personal affront to our well-being. Instead, they become mere input, data points that require observation, not immediate emotional reaction. The philosophy does not ask us for passive resignation. It demands active engagement with reality's limitations. It is an embrace of paradox, that in yielding control over the outcomes, we gain absolute sovereignty over our response. This radical shift redefines success entirely. Success is no longer accumulating wealth or achieving public recognition. Instead, it becomes mastering the internal architecture, the silent citadel within which judgment resides. This process requires immense humility. It means sitting with discomfort when answers are not forthcoming. It means practicing the art of simply observing life as it unfolds, without the immediate impulse to fix, categorize, or predict its next move. Sometimes, all that is required is patience, the recognition that some things must follow their own inevitable course. The myth of control promises a perfect world built by our hands, but ancient wisdom offers something more enduring and far more practical, a guide for the imperfect human navigating an inherently unpredictable universe. The deepest freedom awaits not in the mastery of variables, but in the gentle acceptance of what is. This acknowledgement is not surrender. It is strategic withdrawal from battles that cannot be won, allowing us to conserve our most valuable resource, our peace, for the things we can truly build: character, integrity, and an unbreakable inner composure, against the inevitable unpredictability of life. We have spent our journey acknowledging the chaos of the world around us. We learned that many things are outside of our reach: the market fluctuations, the opinions of others, the timing of events. We established that true freedom does not come from predicting the future or controlling every variable, but from mastering the space between stimulus and response itself. This realization is immense, a foundational shift in how we relate to discomfort and difficulty. But knowing this truth intellectually is vastly different from practicing it when the pressure mounts. Knowing what is good requires doing what is hard. And self-mastery, like any profound skill, is not achieved through one single great insight or sudden epiphany. It is built slowly, deliberately, brick by careful brick, through the rhythm of the mundane and the accumulation of small, almost unnoticed disciplines. The ancient philosophers never promised a perfect life. They offered a methodology for living well within an imperfect world. They understood that philosophy was not merely an intellectual hobby, but a form of rigorous daily exercise. If we view our minds and emotional responses like muscles, then self-discipline is the necessary weight training. It requires consistency, boredom even, and the commitment to showing up every single day. This leads us to finding those anchor points. These are not grand monuments or life-altering events. They are the small, routine rituals that pull us back toward ourselves when the surrounding world tries to yank us in 1,000 different directions. They are the subtle disciplines that ground our sprawling consciousness and make philosophy habitable. Consider the act of journaling. It is more than just recording memories. It is an externalization of internal conflict. When thoughts are trapped within us, they loop endlessly, creating anxiety through sheer repetition. But by committing them to paper, we force those wild, unruly impulses, the self-criticisms, the resentments, the anxious predictions, to take a concrete, manageable form. We move them from the abstract terror of what if into the tangible reality of I felt this today because. This act transforms emotion from an overwhelming storm into data that can be analyzed, understood, and therefore managed. The morning walk is another powerful anchor point. It requires nothing more than feet moving across ground beneath us, breathing air into our lungs, and observing what passes by. But a mindful walk becomes a meditative practice on the present moment. We are trained to live either in regret, dwelling on yesterday's failures, or in worry, projecting tomorrow's catastrophes. The simple rhythm of walking forces a return to the absolute now. When your mind wanders back to the anxiety of an upcoming deadline or the sting of a past disagreement, you simply note it and redirect your focus back to the feeling of the shoe sole against the pavement. It is a continuous act of gentle cognitive correction. Equally vital is mindful eating. In our modern lives, we often eat while consuming other stimuli, scrolling feeds, listening to podcasts, or working on tasks. We lose connection with the fundamental biological act of nourishment. To truly practice mindfulness here is to slow down and dedicate full attention to the sensory experience. The smell of the food, the texture on the tongue, the gradual physical process of swallowing. This seemingly minor discipline anchors us in basic human physicality, reminding us that our deepest self is rooted not just in abstract thought, but in this fragile, breathing vessel. The cumulative power of these disciplines is profound. They do not promise to eliminate stress or difficulty from your life. Instead, they build psychological resilience. They teach you how to process the inevitable disappointments and frustrations with less automatic emotional cost. You are building an inner foundation that is resistant to minor tremors. You are training yourself for endurance. This self-discipline has a cumulative effect. When we commit to these small, repeatable acts of intention, the journal entry before sleep, the 30 minutes of unhurried movement, the focused meal, we begin to change our relationship with routine itself. Routine is often seen as dull or constraining, but viewed through this philosophical lens, routine becomes a sacred structure. It provides predictable moments when we can interrupt the current state of being and ask the vital question: am I reacting automatically, or am I choosing deliberately? By recognizing that self-mastery starts with these manageable habits, we shift our expectations downward, which paradoxically allows us to achieve something greater. We stop waiting for the sudden breakthrough. We celebrate the steady accumulation of effort. We recognize that wisdom is not a flash of lightning. It is the gentle heat generated by continuous friction against the resistance of the world. These daily anchor points act as anchors in the deepest storms of the psyche. When life presents an unyielding wave, a loss, a failure, a significant conflict, you have the practiced skill to pull yourself back, even momentarily, to the point of breath and observation. You do not need grand revelations. You simply need discipline. You need the reliable rhythm of showing up for your own contemplative practice, day after difficult day. The disciplined life is therefore not one defined by extraordinary achievements or dramatic transformations. It is a quiet adherence to bettering oneself through small, conscious choices, turning simple habits into pillars of enduring freedom. It is here, in the steady work of self-observation and gentle, consistent action, that we truly begin to master not the world outside us, but the intricate landscape within our own minds. We have spent much of our lives looking outward for validation. We measure ourselves against the performance of others. In this modern age, it is perhaps harder than ever to appear complete, happy, and successful. Scrolling through feeds of curated perfection, we witness highlight reels, moments so perfect they seem unreal, entire lives built like flawless mosaics. But the sheer volume of these images creates a profound pressure, a constant, silent accusation that our own reality is insufficient. We start comparing our raw, messy, behind-the-scenes life to someone else's carefully edited stage performance. This act of comparison is insidious because it feels so natural. It is our ancient mechanism for establishing belonging or superiority, but philosophically, it is a dangerous trap. By looking sideways, we are fundamentally refusing the richness and complexity of our own journey. We mistake artifice for authenticity, believing that happiness must look exactly like whatever we see on the screen. I must remind you of something critical. That polished facade rarely represents true contentment. What we view online is a meticulously curated narrative. It is a selection process, the elimination of boredom, failure, struggle, and the simple gray moments that constitute most human existence. These are the elements of life that cannot be photographed or displayed to validate success. So, the first task in dismantling this habit of comparison is recognizing its emotional architecture. When we feel that pang of inadequacy after seeing someone else's achievement, a perfect trip, a flawless relationship, a peak career moment, we must pause and ask 3 piercing questions. First, who took this photo? Second, what was not included in this frame? And third, how does the mere existence of this beautiful presentation diminish my own inherent worth? These inquiries pull us out of passive consumption and back into active self-examination. The philosopher understands that judging one's entire reality based on a fraction of another person's curated best moments is not only inaccurate, but profoundly damaging to the soul. We are measuring depth with surface glitter. Remember that true worth does not require external comparison for proof. It exists internally, like a steady flame untouched by passing winds. To combat this trap, we must re-anchor ourselves in our own metrics of value. Instead of asking, "Am I as successful as them?" the question changes to, "What am I learning today? What integrity did I uphold today?" The shift moves us from external achievement, a comparison game with no ultimate winner, to internal growth, the quiet, undeniable accumulation of self-mastery. I must teach you that every single life is inherently messy. It has moments of exhaustion, unexpected failure, mundane frustration, and deep uncertainty. These imperfections are not flaws to be hidden. They are the textures that define a meaningful human existence. Comparing our whole selves to someone else's peak moment is like trying to compare the earth to a diamond. They are different kinds of things entirely. This requires an act of radical emotional withdrawal from external standards. When the comparison whispers, telling you that you should be doing more, having less struggle, or feeling happier than the image suggests, you must treat it as merely a hypothesis. Acknowledge the thought, label it as comparative anxiety, and then allow it to pass without engaging with its perceived truth. This separation is key. Your value does not fluctuate based on someone else's apparent milestones. To build resilience against the siren song of comparison, we practice cultivating deep gratitude for the specific reality we inhabit. What are 3 things right now, in this room, in your life, within your body, that you can genuinely appreciate simply because they exist? Force yourself to name them and feel them. This grounding ritual pulls the focus away from the abstract ideal projected by others and back into the tangible gratitude of the present moment. We must also recognize the concept of sufficient effort versus spectacular achievement. Life rewards sustainable, dedicated practice far more than occasional flashes of brilliance captured for public consumption. The slow, deliberate build of skill, the consistent morning discipline, the daily choice to react with calm instead of anger, these are the true markers of a disciplined soul. They seldom look glamorous on an online feed. So when you feel that familiar tightening in your chest, that uncomfortable pull toward someone else's perceived better life, pause. Recognize the comparison for what it is, merely a faulty data point fed by anxiety. Refuse to accept its premise. Instead, turn inward. Look at the quiet strength of your own hand steadying this cup, or the deep rhythm of your breath keeping you anchored in this very instant. That steadiness, that internal locus of control, is a vastly more valuable and enduring achievement than any curated perfect life ever could be. Remember that your path is unique, unrepeatable, and ultimately enough. We have spent weeks building an inner citadel. We learned that the noise of the world outside does not define the peace within. We understood that control is an illusion, and that true freedom rests in acceptance. We discovered that our reactions, more than any event itself, are the things which truly shape us. If this understanding feels overwhelming, do not let it be. Do not treat philosophy like a final destination or a single dramatic awakening. Instead, remember it as an ongoing rhythm, a breath, a mindful step, a gentle return to self. We are now approaching one of the most counterintuitive skills available to the thoughtful mind, the art of negative visualization. This does not mean dwelling on darkness for its own sake, nor is it merely inviting sadness into your life. Rather, it is an act of profound intellectual preparation. It is mental training designed to build a kind of emotional immune system. Think of it as preemptive resilience. If you know what might go wrong, the moment it happens loses some of its shock power. We are not seeking to magnify suffering. We are simply to demystify potential loss. When we habitually envision the worst-case scenario, the job lost, the routine disrupted, the cherished relationship ending, We strip that imagined calamity of its sheer terror. It becomes a set of problems rather than an overwhelming fate. The goal is not to become pessimistic. The practiced Stoic views hardship not as an endpoint, but as material. They see difficulty as the gym for the soul. By visualizing potential setbacks, we are essentially running drills in the mind. When the actual event occurs, when the layoff notice arrives or the friendship cools, your emotional system does not freeze. It simply recognizes a familiar pattern of stress and responds with practiced composure. Consider this practice applied to daily comfort. You wake up, assuming your roof will hold, your body will function, and the routine will unfold predictably. We are asking you to pause. Visualize that one crucial resource is temporarily gone. Maybe your reliable transport route is closed indefinitely by unexpected flooding. Perhaps the funds meant for next month's tuition are unexpectedly diverted. Do not panic with these thoughts. Instead, observe them dispassionately. Ask yourself, if this truly happened, what would be the very first, smallest action I could take? Not a dramatic rescue plan, but a manageable, immediate step. Call it finding your functional anchor point in the face of adversity. This disciplined imagining shifts your focus from fearing the outcome to valuing your capacity to respond. It changes the narrative from if this happens, I will crumble to if this happens, I have survived difficult things before, and I possess the tools for a next step. This skill works because fear, fundamentally, is uncertainty wrapped in drama. Negative visualization replaces that dramatic uncertainty with structural clarity. It moves us from the realm of helpless dread into the practical domain of problem solving. We are teaching our minds to metabolize adversity before it becomes catastrophic. But this practice requires a delicate balance. If practiced excessively or without moderation, it can become genuine rumination, leading simply to anxiety. Therefore, remember always to couple negative visualization with gratitude and appreciation for the present moment. After envisioning what could be lost, immediately anchor yourself in 3 things that are reliably good right now: the taste of your morning tea, the steady weight of your feet on solid ground, the memory of a genuine kindness. This acts as a psychic counterbalance, preventing the mind from being pulled into an endless vortex of hypotheticals. This entire process is an act of ownership over one's internal state. We are refusing to let our peace be held hostage by tomorrow's unknown variables. We are asserting that even if everything external were stripped away, our career, our physical comforts, our current relationships, the core operating system, the judgment center within us, remains intact and sovereign. It is this inner structure, this cultivated intellectual resilience, which no market crash or sudden bereavement can dismantle. You are building a muscle of emotional preparedness. You are moving past simply coping with setbacks toward actively anticipating and managing them. And in that anticipation lies a deep, quiet freedom. The knowledge that even when the world spins into disarray, your internal compass knows how to point true north. Back to virtue, back to self-mastery, and back to the calm center of thoughtful acceptance. This readiness is not pessimism. It is the highest form of preparation for living well. If the chaotic movements of the world are merely what they are, and if our inner peace depends on nothing but our own response to that chaos, then we must redefine where true value resides. We have spent these chapters mastering reaction, building anchors against external storms, learning to draw boundaries around our own minds. But knowledge without direction is merely academic. It is a skill without purpose. This brings us to the fundamental question of ethics. If our lives are defined by what we think and how we choose to react, then upon what foundation should we build a truly worthy existence? We must move beyond mere self-control. We must ask ourselves something deeper than simply what am I not reacting to. Instead, we must ask, who do I want to be? This inquiry shifts the entire focus of philosophy. It moves us from analyzing our internal state, our anxieties, our comparisons, our fears, to defining our character in action. The ancient philosophers were intensely concerned with virtue. They posited that virtue is not merely a good habit, but rather the sole true good. Everything else, wealth, reputation, comfort, even health, while useful and certainly desired, they considered ultimately indifferent to one's core worth. These things could be lost overnight by misfortune or taken away by chance, leaving us with nothing but our own judgment. And it is that judgment, that inner capacity for reasoned choice, that the ancients claimed was absolutely immune to loss. That, we are taught, is the only reliable good. Imagine a person of profound fortune and power who is gripped by fear or dishonesty in their most vulnerable moments. Their external life is magnificent, their resources endless. Yet if their core integrity fails them, if they act against reasoned goodness, then all that accumulated wealth means nothing for true happiness. Conversely, consider the quiet life, simply lived, where material comforts are few, yet whose inner moral compass guides every decision. That life possesses a different kind of richness, a resilience built from unwavering character. This distinction is crucial. We must understand that outer circumstance does not dictate inner quality. The worth of a life is measured not by its visible triumphs or possessions, but by the consistent alignment between what one believes to be true and how one acts when no one is watching. This concept forces us into a profound ethical reckoning with ourselves. When we consider virtue as the ultimate good, our priorities must change. We stop striving for achievements designed solely to validate external opinion, such as accumulating enough status or earning sufficient praise. Instead, we begin asking, what action reflects my truest self? For the Stoics and many classical thinkers before them, virtue is not a single achievement. It is an ongoing, active state of being. It is practical wisdom, justice in deed, courage when fearful, and temperance in excess. These are not disconnected skills to be acquired, but interwoven aspects of a fully functioning moral self. If you act justly, even when no law mandates it, you cultivate the character trait of fairness. If you meet difficulty with reasoned calm, a discipline we have practiced so much, you embody courage. If you practice moderation in your desires and appetites, the control we have worked to solidify, you demonstrate temperance. These virtues are not abstract concepts reserved for philosophers. They are the mechanics of a well-lived, considered life. They must be exercised daily through disciplined choice. Every small decision becomes a moral examination. Choosing patience over anger in traffic is an act of virtue. Refusing to participate in gossip out of respect for truth is an act of justice. Choosing thoughtful action rather than impulsive reaction when under pressure is the purest expression of temperance. The difficulty, of course, lies not in understanding these definitions intellectually, but in integrating them into the messy, immediate torrent of daily existence. The world constantly presents us with subtle incentives to compromise our integrity. It rewards speed, efficiency, and sometimes emotional grandstanding. These are often at odds with the quiet discipline required by virtue. To live virtuously is, therefore, to adopt a deliberate friction against the current of popular expediency. It requires moments of internal resistance, the choice to be inconveniently truthful or admirably restrained when anger feels momentarily justified. The weight of this understanding can feel enormous. If our ultimate worth rests on something so internal and intangible, how do we prove it? We cannot point to a bank account or a medal to demonstrate moral fortitude. It is an invisible currency, paid only through consistent action. This realization paradoxically liberates us, because true value resides within the person, not the circumstance. We become invulnerable to external loss. Our foundation is no longer built on shaky ground of approval and comfort. It rests upon the bedrock of our own reasoned character. So, what does this mean practically? It means building an ethical muscle that is always ready for use. When faced with temptation, the chance to take the easy, unjust path, we must pause. We must run a rapid calculation. Does this choice reflect my ideal self? This internal audit becomes our most crucial daily discipline. We are no longer merely seeking emotional resilience. We are pursuing moral fortitude. The goal shifts from simply surviving chaos to actively improving the quality of our own being. Remember that this journey is not about achieving a perfect, untouchable state of goodness. It is messy, human, and requires constant attention. To be virtuous means recognizing your flaws with radical honesty, accepting that you will stumble, and then choosing, immediately, to rise again with greater intention. It is the commitment to striving for self-improvement, day after challenging day. The philosophy does not grant us a permanent shield against failure. It merely equips us with the tools to process that failure without letting it define our fundamental worth. True freedom, we see now, is the freedom of character. The unwavering knowledge that even if everything outside falls away, the moral architecture you have built within yourself remains whole and utterly yours. We spend so much of our lives trying to meet expectations. The weight, the invisible pressure, comes not from failure itself, but from the expectation that we should never fail. We build narratives about who we are supposed to be: the successful student, the dutiful employee, the perfect partner. These identities are handed to us by parents, by society, by our peers, and they come attached to a hefty sense of obligation. We treat these expected roles not as suggestions, but as unbreakable law. And when we fall short, the response is often devastating. Self-criticism, paralyzing anxiety, or an overwhelming need to perform flawlessly just to maintain the illusion of acceptability. The burden of expectation whispers insidious demands into our quiet moments, telling us that our intrinsic value is directly tied to our external performance. It is a subtle but relentless form of bondage. We become expert actors in plays written by others. We spend all our emotional energy managing perceptions, ensuring we appear capable enough, stable enough, deserving enough. The mask becomes part of our face, and gradually we begin to forget the original expression underneath. Our genuine desires, those messy, imperfect whispers that spring purely from the core of who we are, seem too unreliable, too unsophisticated for this highly curated stage. They must be silenced or refined until they match the acceptable script. But what if the script itself is flawed? What if the relentless pursuit of meeting external demands hollows out the very life meant to sustain us? Our philosophy urges us to look at expectation not as a guiding star, but as a cage built from comparison and fear. The problem with expectations is that they are always looking outward, at what others expect, or at what we believe society values most highly. Consider the family expectation. We assume our parents know what brings us true happiness, that career trajectory, social status, or marital arrangement represents optimal fulfillment. Or look at peer pressure, the unspoken standard to achieve more, buy bigger, and feel constantly upwardly mobile. These expectations are deeply comforting because they provide a clear path, a promised destination where success is defined by measurable coordinates. Yet, following those coordinates rarely leads to genuine self-possession. It only leads to exhaustion. We become exquisitely skilled at managing the appearance of a stable life, while potentially neglecting the necessary work of building an authentic one. The constant negotiation between who we are and who others expect us to be drains our internal reserves. The ancient wisdom, that profound gift of contemplation, asks us to distinguish between expectation and intrinsic worth. It demands that we separate "am I lovable" from "am I performing well?" Our value cannot be a variable in an equation determined by external approval. This realization is liberating, though initially terrifying, because it requires abandoning the safety net of external validation. The weight of expectations often forces us into a cycle where love itself feels conditional. We modify our emotions and ambitions based on perceived needs. We only pursue certain goals to please a mentor, or we suppress certain desires to maintain harmony in a relationship. Our own quiet compass is constantly being recalibrated by the magnetic pull of others' demands. To dismantle this burden is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of profound self-respect. It is recognizing that simply because something has been expected does not mean it is correct or even desirable for us. The moment we can observe the expectation, the internalized voice saying "you must," without accepting its premise, a space opens up. That gap between the demand and our acceptance is where true freedom resides. This detachment begins with humility, the willingness to admit that your internal compass is occasionally wrong, or perhaps pointing in an unexpected direction. We must cultivate the strength to live lives that are unapologetically ours, even if they draw puzzled glances from well-meaning families or skeptical colleagues. The disciplined refusal to shrink oneself into a size acceptable to others requires radical self-acceptance. It means embracing the parts of your character, the eccentricities and passions that defy easy categorization. It is accepting that imperfection itself is not a flaw in design, but rather proof of life lived fully and authentically. True strength emerges when we accept our own unpredictable nature. We must learn to quiet the inner critic that speaks only in terms of comparison. You should be further along, or everyone else has figured this out. These voices are merely echo chambers built from societal noise, not reflections of objective truth about your worth. Your journey is uniquely yours. Its timeline and contours belong solely to you. The work then becomes a quiet redirection of energy. Instead of constantly checking the rearview mirror for external approval, what did others think of that mistake? What reputation have I damaged? We must fix our gaze straight ahead, toward the disciplined integrity of the present moment. Our goal is not perfection in outcome, but excellence in effort. To do the best we can with the resources and wisdom available right now, regardless of whether anyone else applauds or even notices. This steady focus on internal virtue, on choosing justice when it is easier to choose selfishness, on acting with courage even when fear dictates retreat, is the ultimate shield against the crushing weight of expectation. By accepting our own messy humanity, we finally liberate ourselves from the need to perform for an invisible audience. The conflict does not arrive as a sudden shout or a catastrophic blow. It arrives quietly, often disguised by familiarity and comfort. It is the disagreement across the dinner table, the sharp edge of words exchanged with someone you genuinely care for. In those moments, our initial instinct is raw reaction. We feel the heat rise, a flush on the neck, the rapid thump of blood in the ears. The urge is to seize the narrative, to defend the self, to win the exchange at any cost. It is a powerful, primal impulse that dictates that emotion must immediately dictate speech. But we have learned something vital. Between the sudden sting of a hurtful word and your response, there exists a gap. This tiny space is not merely temporal. It is the crucible of freedom. It is the physical manifestation of free will, the sacred territory where our character is forged. Most people do not live in this space. They are swept away by the current of impulse, falling into the automatic groove of habituated reaction. The ancient philosophers understood this gap intuitively. They saw it as a gift, a pause button provided by the cosmos itself. It forces us to step back from the immediate emotional tide and ask a single, profound question. What is truly at stake here? Is my peace worth sacrificing it for the sake of being right? In the heat of conflict, our minds tend towards self-protection through external assertion. We focus on changing the other person, their viewpoint, their tone, their belief system. But recall what we have journeyed through together. The power to change another person is an illusion. It is a fantasy that leads only to exhaustion and disappointment. They are sovereign individuals, guided by their own internal landscape of desires and fears. Therefore, the training must be radical self-inquiry. When the initial emotional wave hits, when they say the thing that stings or make the comment that provokes anger, we must not engage with the content of the critique itself. We must first address the force of our own internal narrative. The question shifts from how do I reply to what is my underlying goal here. If we are reactive, our goal is often validation, proving ourselves right or making the other person acknowledge our hurt. This makes the conflict a zero-sum game. For me to win, you must lose emotional standing. And this transaction guarantees mutual damage. But if we choose response, our purpose changes entirely. Our aim becomes self-mastery within the interaction itself. We are no longer playing for victory. We are practicing stillness and cultivating wisdom. We shift from an external focus, the disagreement, to an internal one, our own steady composure. The key mechanism is recognizing that a reaction is automatic, fueled by emotion and therefore uncontrolled. A response, however, is considered. It requires observation, distance, and the deliberate application of judgment. You are not simply hit by the stimulus. You must choose how to process it. This choice is the ultimate exercise in freedom. Imagine yourselves standing at the edge of a rushing river. The stream represents the chaos of an argument, the sudden accusations, the heightened voices, the rapid escalation. Your emotion is the urge to leap in and fight the current. To respond immediately is to be swept away by the force of the water. But to pause, to recognize the bank where you stand, that space between your feet and the rushing stream, that is the gap. That is where you draw a single breath, anchoring yourself to solid ground. When we practice inhabiting this space, we introduce a layer of necessary delay. We do not reply instantly. Instead, we use simple techniques of intellectual distance. Maybe it is silence, or maybe it is acknowledging their point without agreeing with its judgment. Perhaps the best response is simply to state, "I hear that you feel strongly about this," and then wait. Waiting is profoundly difficult for modern minds, which are conditioned for instant gratification and immediate resolution. But sustained waiting is where resilience is built. It allows us time to move beyond the raw pain of being wronged and access the cooler clarity of reason. It lets us distinguish between genuine grievance and merely temporary discomfort. The disciplines we build, the mindful walk, the journaling, the pause in comparison, all train this core muscle. The ability to delay action until judgment has taken hold. We are conditioning ourselves to become observers of our own emotional life, rather than mere participants in it. We accept that uncomfortable truths may exist on both sides of a conflict, but we reserve the right to refuse to have our inner peace mortgaged for temporary external satisfaction. This gap is where ethical action resides. It requires courage. The courage not only to disagree calmly, but the much harder courage to remain quiet when speaking seems necessary. We realize that true strength is not found in the volume of our voice or the force of our rebuttal, but in the steadiness of our spirit. The greatest gift we can offer ourselves and others during times of conflict is this pause. To honor the space between stimulus and response means honoring our own sovereignty, acknowledging that even when life assaults us with disagreement, we are never truly at the mercy of external forces. We are always, fundamentally, in charge of where we choose to place our attention, and more critically, when we choose to let it go. That capacity for non-reaction is the hallmark of true inner freedom. We have spent these preceding moments examining the boundaries of our will. We have learned that much of the external world operates beyond our direct command. The sudden shift in a market, the unpredictable whims of another person's heart, the inescapable currents of chance itself. And this knowledge was meant to grant us a profound sense of detachment. But sometimes, simply knowing what we cannot control is not enough. The mind recoils from the void. It struggles with the emptiness left by letting go. We build walls against randomness. We grasp at certain perceived securities, perfection, predictability, flawless performance. These habits of mental grasping can be far more exhausting than the external chaos itself. We have journeyed through the disciplined act of self-inquiry. We learned that our true domain is not in fixing the world around us, but in mastering the quiet space within ourselves. We discovered the radical freedom found in accepting what we cannot change, and the power inherent in merely choosing how we respond to chaos. But these individual acts of restraint, the gentle pause, the disciplined breath, often feel isolated. They are personal victories against internal turmoil, impressive feats of solitary composure. The wisdom we have gathered so far has been remarkably focused on the self. What thoughts must I control? Where do I draw the boundary between my will and chance? It is a vital work, this architecture of the mind, but it can feel strangely hermetic. As if virtue were merely an internal achievement, valuable only to the person who achieves it. This brings us to a critical shift in perspective. True philosophy does not exist solely within the fortress of one's own mind. It spills out, like a gentle current, into the messy, complicated river of human connection. Consider the profound difference between being calm and remaining isolated. A person can be perfectly tranquil in their private contemplation, a serene island untouched by tide or struggle. Yet, if that tranquility does not influence the surrounding waters, it risks becoming merely decorative. The greatest potential of self-mastery is realized when it changes the field around it. This concept we are exploring today is often called the ripple effect. It suggests that our most profound internal state is never purely private. It inevitably affects others. When you cultivate an unwavering calm at your own center, you do not just benefit yourself, you provide a psychological ballast for those near you. In moments of high stress, when the anxieties are taut and ready to snap, that stable composure acts as an unintentional anchor. The human experience is largely defined by emotional exchange. We live in a constant negotiation of moods, expectations, and distress signals. When everyone around us is operating at a high frequency of panic, reacting sharply to perceived slights or minor setbacks, the cumulative weight can become overwhelming. It is exhausting for every soul involved. But what if one individual refuses that frantic rhythm? What if they consciously choose to slow their own pace, to filter the rush of emotion through the practiced clarity of non-judgment. Imagine a gathering, a family dinner, perhaps, or a professional meeting under severe deadline pressure. The air is thick with unspoken tension and simmering frustration. Voices rise too quickly. Accusations are thrown out before they can be truly considered. Everyone is in fight or flight mode. They are reacting automatically to the perceived threat of inadequacy or disorder. In that charged atmosphere, a single person continues to practice the pause we learned earlier. They do not withhold their presence, but they modulate their response. When someone speaks with sharp frustration, fueled by stress, rather than immediately defending oneself or mirroring the anger, one pauses. One chooses instead to acknowledge the emotion without adopting it. This small act, the deliberate refusal to escalate a conflict, does more than simply protect the individual. It creates space. It slows the emotional tempo of the entire room. The effect on those nearby is subtle but profound. Others notice it. They sense the shift in gravitational pull. When one person refuses to participate in the panic, others naturally begin to check their own rhythm against that stability. The initial act of calm becomes an invitation to a similar quietude. It suggests, you do not have to be frantic. You do not have to absorb this distress entirely. This ripple effect is crucial because it redefines what we consider strength. We have traditionally equated strength with assertiveness, loudness, or the ability to dominate a conflict. The philosophy of calm teaches us that true moral power often resides in quiet endurance, in the refusal to yield your composure to external pressures. It is the mastery of non-escalation. It is not merely about being passive. To be emotionally inert means nothing. True stillness must possess an active quality, the strength to hold space for others' emotions without absorbing their chaos. This requires immense practice, a deeper muscle than mere self-discipline. It requires moral courage. When we meet another person in their deepest distress, whether that is professional failure, personal loss, or deep misunderstanding, the natural human impulse is often to match the intensity of that pain, to amplify it with our own sympathy, which can easily spill into alarmism, shared panic, or helpless tears. But the disciplined practitioner learns to observe this pattern from a respectful distance. One does not solve the other person's struggle. One stabilizes the environment for the struggle. The calm mind acts as a counter-frequency to distress. The benefit of carrying that steady presence is twofold. First, it protects your own inner citadel from secondary emotional exhaustion. You do not become dragged into others' crises. Second, and more importantly, you model a radically different way of interacting with the world. You teach others, non-verbally, that their distress does not necessitate immediate crisis or escalating conflict. This realization is deeply empowering because it transforms self-mastery from a private shield into a social gift. It becomes a form of ethical action. By remaining centered, you are contributing positively to the well-being of your community, be it the family circle, the workplace team, or the broader public sphere. The final journey of philosophy is therefore one of profound interconnection. We do not become virtuous simply by perfecting ourselves. We demonstrate virtue when our perfected self provides stability in a turbulent world. The quiet discipline cultivated within becomes an outward force, rippling outwards until it begins to subtly change the weather of those around us. To maintain this composure requires constant vigilance. It means checking the assumptions that drive your reaction, remembering that the initial trigger, the spilled coffee, the harsh word, the sudden failure, is never actually the source of suffering. The true variable is always our internal response. By consistently choosing calm when panic seems easiest, you become a steady point on a turning earth. And this consistent practice of ethical stillness is perhaps the greatest and most powerful contribution to humanity we can offer. We have spent time learning to observe the currents of external chaos. We learned that true peace is not found in a silence mandated by others, but within the cultivated space between our thoughts and our actions. We established that much of the anxiety we feel is rooted in trying to control variables, the fleeting moods of colleagues, the unpredictable whims of fate, or the perceived judgment of society. These are arenas outside of our sovereign self. Yet, even when we successfully manage these external pressures, a quieter, more insidious challenge remains. It resides deep within the architecture of the mind itself, the inner narrator. This narrator is a ceaseless voice. It speaks at all times, providing constant commentary on our existence. It whispers judgments before we have made them. It predicts failures before they happen. And after every small misstep, it delivers a verdict of deficiency. This voice often sounds authoritative, deeply knowing, almost comforting in its consistency. But that authority is an illusion. It mistakes habit for truth. Think back to the constant stream of thoughts from previous chapters, the self-doubt when comparing our journey to others, the immediate spike of defensiveness when challenged, the narrative that insists I am not good enough or this will never work. These are not facts. They are just sound waves passing through the chambers of your mind, labeled and dressed up by a persistent storyteller that we have mistakenly accepted as truth. The challenge now is recognizing this inner monologue for what it truly is, merely data. It is not destiny. It is simply speech. To master our inner narrator is to treat our thoughts not as immutable statements about who we are, but as neutral hypotheses that require careful scrutiny. We must learn the deep philosophical skill of observation, to listen to the voice without believing the content. To hear, I am failing, and respond only with the quiet acknowledgement. I observe a thought suggesting failure. To hear, you should have done this differently, and simply pause, recognizing the pattern of regret. This is not about silencing thoughts, for that is impossible, perhaps even futile. It is about adjusting our relationship to them. We are moving from being trapped within the narrative to becoming the spacious audience watching the play unfold inside our own heads. Observe how deeply ingrained this habit is. When we face difficulty, when we feel overwhelmed, or when a decision feels monumental, what happens? That inner narrator ramps up the volume. It starts listing perceived inadequacies. Look at your messy habits. You are too slow. No one understands you. These narratives serve an immediate function. They create certainty and urgency. They make us act quickly, react strongly, and believe absolutely in their pronouncements. The sophisticated part of the self-mastery process is noticing when this volume increases and what triggered it. Was it a moment of genuine vulnerability? Was it fatigue? Or was it simply proximity to a major decision point where the mind seeks an easy answer, even if that answer is built on flawed assumptions? Consider the difference between judgment and mere description. If you are observing a cup spilled on the floor, the descriptive statement is, the liquid has left the ceramic vessel and now occupies the tiled surface. The judgmental narrative states, you were careless, you always make messes. The first statement is purely observational, devoid of value. The second instantly creates emotional weight, assigns guilt, and suggests a permanent flaw in character. Our goal in mastering this inner narrator is to perpetually revert to description, to strip the thought down to its most objective skeleton. We practice separating the self from the narrative. We understand that I am anxious is not the same thing as I feel anxiety. The former suggests a permanent identity. The latter describes a temporary physical and emotional state. The shift in language, from identity assertion to momentary description, is profoundly liberating. It creates space. This newly created psychological space, this silence within the inner voice, is where true freedom resides. It is not found by achieving some perfect external outcome. It is claimed moment by refusing to grant authority to a thought simply because it was loud or familiar. You realize that while thoughts may appear relentless and unavoidable, they are fundamentally transient. They are chemical signals passing through an immensely complex biological machine. By treating every internal statement as a working theory, a hypothesis awaiting refutation, we disarm its emotional power. We treat "I must achieve this" not as a moral imperative inscribed on our soul, but as one idea among many circulating in the mind. When that thought loses its status as absolute truth, it loses its coercive power over your will. The work thus becomes less about fixing flaws and more about refining perception. It is an ongoing act of metacognition, thinking about the way you think. You are not conquering a monster. You are gently retraining a conversationalist who has become habitually loud. You are teaching yourself that thoughts, no matter how compelling or distressing they feel, possess zero inherent power until you grant them permission to exert it. The ultimate mastery of self is realizing that the person you fundamentally are, your capacity for rational response, your capacity for compassionate observation, your very existence as a conscious observer, that core identity remains utterly untouched by the ramblings, anxieties, or false convictions presented to you in the quiet chambers of your own mind. Your true anchor point is not skill, nor virtue, nor achievement. It is the sovereign power of your awareness itself. For much of our journey thus far, we have gazed inward. We have trained ourselves to observe the noise, the relentless clamor of anxiety, the internal critique, the impulse to react instantly. We learned that true peace was not found in external silence or perfect circumstance, but deep within the disciplined space between stimulus and response. We discovered the profound power of separating our personal self-worth from temporary achievements and unmanageable expectations. Our practice moved beyond mere individual tranquility. It became about building an invisible fortress around the core of who we are. A resilience built not by avoiding struggle, but by mastering one's own internal reactions to inevitable disorder. But philosophy, in its truest calling, cannot be a purely solitary pursuit. It is never just about self-mastery for the sake of self-satisfaction. If all we sought was inner calm, we could simply build a beautiful, undisturbed sanctuary and never have to leave it. Yet, human existence is fundamentally relational. Our peace inherently ripples outward. To be truly free, to achieve that state of internal equilibrium, means realizing that this cultivated stillness must not remain merely an internal monument. The great work, then, becomes the bridge from self-awareness to ethical action. It asks a simple but vast question. If my deepest source of strength is my calm mind, how does that composure translate into the messy, unpredictable demands of community? How do I ensure that my disciplined introspection serves not just me, but also the collective well-being around me? We have mastered the inner narrator, that persistent voice whispering doubts and judgments. We learn to observe it as a thought passing through the mind's consciousness, like weather patterns across an open sky. This was a crucial step toward freedom, realizing that my awareness itself is separate from the transient nature of my thoughts. It allowed me to breathe freely, unburdened by self-accusation or performance anxiety. Yet, mastering oneself carries a profound weight. The realization dawns that a highly controlled internal state can lead to an unintended form of emotional withdrawal, a tendency to retreat into one's practiced calm when the world is calling for vigorous engagement. We risk becoming spectators to life, observing conflict from a safe and perfectly understood distance, forgetting that sometimes true strength demands active participation. The next phase requires us to reorient our focus. It is not enough merely to be impervious to disorder. We must learn how to use our invulnerability constructively. This means understanding the profound concept of duty. Duty is not simply a set of external rules or obligations handed down by society. It is an internal commitment, a recognition that because I possess a certain measure of self-mastery, I am now uniquely positioned to contribute something stable and valuable to my community. Consider the ripple effect once more. If one person in a tense room refuses to escalate, if one employee chooses thoughtful response over knee-jerk frustration, or if one family member speaks with unwavering kindness despite deep hurt, that singular act becomes an ethical force multiplier. It doesn't just impact that moment, it changes the gravitational pull of the entire interaction. The philosophy shifts from asking what I must endure to what I ought to give. The self-focus, which was vital for survival and resilience, now needs an expansion point, the other person. This expansion is where ethical living takes root. It means acknowledging that my ability to remain detached is not a zero-sum game. It actually enhances my capacity for connection. The ancient wisdom speaks of Oikeiosis, a concept sometimes translated as appropriateness, or the natural extension of self-concern outward toward others. Initially, we care primarily about ourselves and our immediate family. This is natural. Then, through repeated acts of gentle practice and conscious awareness, that circle of concern gradually expands, from self to kin, from kin to community, and ultimately recognizing humanity as a shared ethical sphere. The disciplined heart learns this pattern, because I value my own inner peace so deeply, because I have invested the energy in mastering my responses. I now recognize that the most profound way to respect myself is by living in alignment with a moral duty to others. My capacity for compassion, therefore, becomes inseparable from my practiced detachment. This integration of self-discipline and otherness defines ethical adulthood. It means accepting that while my emotions are sovereign territory, my actions are inherently public and shared. Every judgment I make, every word I choose to speak in anger or frustration, reverberates outward, influencing the internal quietude of those around me. The journey thus becomes less about fixing myself and more about becoming a dependable force for stability within a volatile world. It is embracing the concept that self-mastery has no end point. It is not a jewel found at the end of a long path, but an ongoing act of careful attention applied to every single interaction. We must perpetually guard against the subtle seduction of withdrawal, the temptation to simply maintain perfect inner silence and never engage with the messy demands of shared humanity. To live ethically is thus to understand that our self-cultivation is inherently a debt we owe to the world. The disciplined mind becomes an active resource, capable of mediating tension, fostering true dialogue, and modeling reasoned behavior when chaos seems inevitable. It is here, at this intersection, where perfected inner life meets necessary outer action, that the philosophy finds its ultimate, magnificent completion. Our best selves are not merely self-contained. They are fundamentally connective. We have spent chapters examining the battlefield within. We learn to pause between stimulus and response, finding that crucial space where our free will resides. We faced the myths of control and confronted the relentless comparisons dictated by others' narratives. Our goal became clear, not merely individual tranquility, but a state of sustained inner integrity that could withstand the unpredictable pressures of life. We understood that self-mastery was not a finished monument, built one glorious moment. Instead, it is recognized as an unceasing breath, a continuous act of will day after quiet day. This brings us to the concept of Oikeiosis, the natural expansion of care. It tells us that when we master ourselves, our focus cannot remain solely within the walls of the self. Our cultivated calm becomes a resource, a psychological ballast that is meant to spill over into the community. The depth of our introspection must eventually meet the breadth of humanity. The philosopher teaches us that true ethical life requires more than just personal peace. It demands connection and duty. It asks us to move from the self as the primary axis of concern to the other human being, recognizing a shared nature. We begin by nurturing ourselves, disciplining our judgments, stabilizing our reactions, defining virtue within our own character. But this internal work is merely preparation for external action. The self-mastery we cultivate thus does not lead to withdrawal. It empowers profound engagement. The practice of Oikeiosis is the steady realization that caring for one thing naturally extends the circle of care outward. We feel a natural pull toward justice, toward mitigating suffering, and toward participation in the shared human project. This initial spark of self-care, the choice to remain composed when chaos reigns, is inherently an ethical act because it prevents escalation, models patience, and elevates the emotional state of those around us. To stabilize our own mind is a gift we offer the community, and this brings us back to the rhythm of life itself. Philosophy, in its highest form, is not the peak moment of realization, nor is it the written final word of a profound text. It is the mundane repetition. It is the mindful washing of dishes. It is the patient listening to a friend whose worries seem disproportionately large. It is the disciplined habit of returning our attention, time and again, to what is genuinely before us, to the present moment. We must redefine the meaning of practice. Practice does not mean grand gestures or dramatic epiphanies. It means showing up. It means the consistency required to recognize that even when we feel fully equipped, even after a season of discipline and self-acceptance, the temptation to retreat into old patterns remains. We are always on the threshold of forgetting what we have learned. Our daily life becomes our philosophical proving ground. The mundane tasks, the commute, the argument with a loved one, the moment of boredom while waiting in line. These moments are not merely distractions from the deeper work. They are the work itself. They require us to apply the full spectrum of what we have learned. The pause between stimulus and response, the gentle withdrawal from comparison, the reminder that our value rests on character, not achievement. This sustained effort is the continuous nature of wisdom. The challenge now is sustainability. It is not enough to feel virtuous for a week or even a month. We must embed this understanding into the very structure of our being. We treat self-discipline like a muscle. It only grows through consistent and sometimes unglamorous repetition. Sometimes we will falter. We will succumb to old anxieties. We will become overwhelmed by external forces that feel too large to manage. And in those moments, true mastery is not found in the absence of failure, but in the speed and humility with which we return to practice. This journey requires a persistent state of attentive awareness. It asks us to observe our judgments as if they were thoughts passing through the mind, to recognize them as data points, transient phenomena that have no inherent truth or power over our core self. This constant observation is how we solidify our freedom. We are always practicing non-attachment from both external events and internal emotional narratives. The ultimate realization of Oikeiosis is therefore a seamless merge. The disciplined care for the self finds its most profound expression in the natural, effortless extension of that care toward others. Our ethical life becomes a steady flow, guided by the wisdom accumulated through rigorous daily effort. It is not an achievement to be celebrated. It is a way of being, a persistent commitment to wake up and begin again with attentiveness, patience, and renewed grace, right where we stand. And so, we learn that philosophy does not lead us to a peak, but rather guides us along the long valley floor. It is about the steady rhythm of walking, the continuous practice, accepting imperfection in ourselves, embracing our responsibilities to community, and understanding that the greatest reward